Hello everyone, what's up? Front-end Tips here. Welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you the basics and the concepts of how to create a carousel control like this, which contains the arrows left to right for navigation and also some indicators that indicates which kind of section you are in, and also you can utilize these. As you can see that it has this nice sliding effect, and you can use the arrows to go back and forth. So this is going to be a series. This is going to be the first carousel sort of layout that I'm going to show you, and later on in another tutorial I'm going to show you how you can enhance it, how you can add more effects, and so forth. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and do check out the channel. There's so many nice tutorials and front-end tips, and let's get started. As always, I will go to kotus.com and then going to the front end using our online HTML, JavaScript, and CSS editor. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a div with class container, and this is going to be the container that holds our carousel control. Um, Inside the container, I'm going to define the actual carousel class, a div with the carousel class. So this is really the main component that we're building today. And within the carousel, I'm going to add another div and I will call it slider. And this slider will be the parent to the sections that we have in our carousel. So this particular carousel is a content carousel or slider, but you can obviously attach images or add images as a background and so forth. So I'm going to create a section and call it content for section 1. Copying this section, paste it maybe um, 3 more times. Going to rename this 2, 3, and 4, right? So this is the basic markup we can have for our carousel. In the CSS, I'm going to give the container a width of 90% and maybe give it a margin of 10 pixel um, from top and bottom, and auto from left and right, so that it will center our container. So now I'm going to style my carousel, giving it a border 2 pixels, solid, and CCC. So you can see now the border of it. Going to give it a height of let's say 400 pixel. This is the height that you can define yourself depending on how sort of long your content is. So I'm just gonna put 400 for the sake of this tutorial. So now we have our carousel, and now I'm going to go ahead and inside the carousel, I'm going to style the slider. So the slider obviously has a height of 100%. So it's gonna fill the whole height of its parent carousel, which is 400 pixel. And then I would make the display to be flex. So when I say display flex, it automatically aligns the content of or the children of the slider to be sort of aligned horizontally. Now going here, I'm going to style the sections within the slider. We'll set the flex basis to be 100%. So now you can see that they are pretty much holding the same space within its parent, which is the slider. Now, but the but the carousel, the each section has the full width of the parent. In order to do that, we know that we have 4 sections over here, right? So if I multiply the width of its parent, which is the slider, by 4, so 100% by 4, 400%, then you'll see that in the actual boundary, we're going to only see the first section here. So I'm going here, define the width to be 400%, right? Now you can see that only content 1 will be visible in our in the boundary of our carousel, right? So far so good. Everything is all right. Now I'm going to center this element, this text within this section. In order to do that, I'm going to set the display to be flex, and then I will use justify content to be center. This will align the content within the section to be centered horizontally, and also I can use align items to be centered so that it aligns it vertically, right? So everything is all right. Now, if I only change the width of the parent container to be 20%, you will see that it actually shows we have the content section here and then content section, the same space between these contents. So now everything looks good. Just to show you why we defined the slider, what we're going to do in JavaScript, we're just going to work with the position of this slider. So if I just define a border, let's say 1 pixel solid red, to show you the boundary of it. So you can see that this is the boundary. I'm just going to change this from the margin from the container so that you can actually see what is the boundary of the slider. So imagine if we move this red sort of section, which is our slider, to the right, to the left, you can see that it will go by 25%, it will show the content 2. By 50%, it will show the content 3. And by 75%, it will show content 4. Just to show you what I mean, if I just say transform translate minus 25%, you can see that now content 2 will be the visible section within our carousel. So in carousel, ultimately, if I say overflow hidden, that would be the only section that will be visible. I can do the same thing with 50%. Now you can see that the content 3 will be visible, and obviously 75%, it will be content 4. So I'm going to remove this for now. I'm going to change the overflow. I'm just going to remove the overflow so that we can see the whole slider. Just make sure you understand that ultimately the only visible section is within this sort of gray bordered area, which is our actual carousel, right? So for now, after this, I'm going to, inside the carousel, define another div with class controls. And within that, I'm just going to put my arrows, creating a span with the class arrow and then our left arrow, and then going to copy this, paste it again, and change it to the right arrow. Now I want to make sure that my carousel has position relative. The reason being that I'm going to set the positions for arrows to become on to just position them on the left and right over here using position um, absolute. So absolute positioning. I need to make sure their parent, which is the carousel here, actually has the position relative, right? Now to just style it to show you how it works, I'm just going to say controls and then arrow. I would say position absolute. Going to add here just a text for now. We're going to replace them with arrows, so left and right. Now I have position arrow. I just say top 50%. So now you can see that both of them are centered um, based on this value. And for the left, arrow left, I'm just going to say I want from the left side to be 10 pixel. I'm going to use the same for my right arrow. So right, I'm going to set it to right 10 pixel, right? So you can see that now we have left and then right. I can go ahead and give it a cursor pointer so that it will be obvious that these are sort of clickable, right? Now, the only thing I need to do is have 3 references in my JavaScript. So I'm just going to have a reference to my slider, which is this red bordered box. So document dot query selector, and then the div with the class slider. Going to have the same thing for my left arrow. So left arrow document dot query selector, and then left. and the same thing for the right arrow. So I copied this and pasted it here, so I have the right. So now what I can say is that I can say when I click on the right arrow, so right arrow, adding a event listener, click, passing a function as the same second parameter, and then within this function, what I want to do is set the transform, as you saw I did it here in my CSS when I was showing you how we can move this slider left and right. I can just say slider.style.transform. Just for the sake of showing you what happens, I'm going to say translate minus 25%, right? When I click on the right arrow, I expect the slider, which is this red box, to translate minus 25%, basically going to the left. So if I click on this, you can see that now content for section 2 is visible here. I can go ahead and move this from 10%, 10 pixel to auto so that it gets centered. Now I can go ahead for now and add a transition to my slider so that you actually can see the slide movement. So all 0.3 seconds. So now I'm going to save this for now. Now if I click on the right arrow here, you can see the transition actually, where it transitioned to content for section 2. Now what I need to do is just define an index. So initially we are at index 0, which shows our content for section 1. So I'm just going to define a section. So var section equals to 0, right? Or I'm just going to call it section index equals to 0. Now every time I click on the right arrow, what I want to do, instead of hard coding this 20 minus 25, I'm just going to use the string concatenation. So I'm going to just make this a little bit bigger so you can see what happens here. So now if I just say 25 here minus 25, we can see that the same effect happens. But if I click on right again, it's a hard-coded value, so it will stay on content. So now what I need to do is I want to make sure I increase the section index to 1 here in this case, and go ahead and increase it by 1 because we are moving forward. So now if I say section index equals to section index plus 1, and then here instead of minus 25, I just say section index multiply by 25, right? So initially our section index is 0. When I click on right, I will increase that section index by 1, so it becomes 1. And then 1 multiplied by minus 25 will become ultimately minus 25, translate minus 25%. So if I click on right, you'll see that it goes there. And then if I click again, you can see that it goes to section 3. And then here goes to section 4. Now what we want to make sure is that when we click again, we don't want to have nothing, right? So we want to make sure that we limit this so that when it reaches to section 4, we don't allow the section to go any more by clicking on the right arrow. To be able to do that, I'm going to use ternary operation. So I'm just saying if section is less than the length of the sections, which is 4 minus 1, so 3. Go ahead and increase the section by 1. Otherwise, just set it to 3, right? So now if I click on right, I just want to make sure that I'm doing everything right. Section, this should be section index. So now if I click on right, you can see that it goes content 2, content 3, content 4. But now I'm just clicking on the right, you'll see that nothing changes, which is correct. Now we're going to have the same thing. I'm going to copy this for the left arrow, right? So I'm just going to say if left arrow is clicked, instead of section index less than 3, now we are moving on the other direction. I just want to make sure if my section index is more than 0, I want to decrease the section index. Otherwise, I will set it to 0. and everything else is the same, right? So now if I go right, you will see that it goes to section 2. Now if I press left, it will go back to content for section 1. And now I expect when I click on this, nothing happens. So now you can see that when I click on this, since the section will become 0, it will default it to 0. It will not decrease it anymore, right? So right, 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 left, left, left. So everything looks all right. I can go ahead and obviously set the overflow to hidden for my carousel so that we only see the correct section. So right, right, left, left. Now I'm going to go and reset the container's width to be maybe 90% so that now it looks like this. So if I click on right, you can see that I have this. You can go ahead and make it 100% if you want the full width of your page. But for now, let's set it to 80%. And this is the container. It's not the carousel itself. It's the container that has the carousel that I'm changing the width, right? So now to change these left and right to actual arrows, I'm going to go to material icons. So material icons, and going here, I will search for arrow. And then here, if I scroll down, I can see that I have these arrows. Opening this up, going to instructions, and then within the instructions, I'm just going to search for link so that I can get these style sheets for these material icons. Going back to my code, in my CSS, I'm going to say, I'm going to actually switch to this layout now since we have finished the initial code. I'm going to the CSS and say import URL and the material icons URL. Going back to material icons website, I can just, now that this is selected, I can go ahead and copy this code. Coming back to my code in HTML, I can replace it with right. So instead of the text right, I'm going to copy this. And then instead of text left, I'm going to copy this, right? Just make sure that this is instead of right, it's left, right? So now you can see that we have our arrows. I can actually increase their size. Going to my CSS, I know that these arrow class now has an I tag. So if I just set the font size to be maybe 30 pixel, um, let's see, what am I, okay, I need to put the dot here, maybe even bigger, 40 pixel. So now maybe even way bigger, 60 pixel. Now you can see that it's not completely vertically centered because we just set top 50%. We didn't translate it up minus 50. So I'm just going to say transform, transform, translate y on y-axis minus 50% of its height. Now you can see that our arrows get centered vertically in the carousel container. So now we have this. So if I start clicking on this, the same effect happens. So far so good. Now I'm going to go ahead and add the indicators that will show up down here, right? So going to my HTML, in the same parent, which is controls, we have two spans. I'm going to add an unordered list, and within that, I'm going to add as many sections as we have here, LIs. So first LI, going to add more, 2, 3, 4, right? So now I'm going back to the CSS, going to style my UL to be well, nothing is visible right now, but I'm going to make sure that the position is absolute as well because we want to set it down here. I'm going to style my LIs within the UL to be width, let's say 20 pixel, height 20 pixel, give it a border of 2 pixels solid and a dark shade of gray, so 333, and make sure that my UL is actually having a bottom 20 pixel. So you can see that now it shows up here, and also I want to center it horizontally since it's absolute position. I can just say left 50%, and then transform, translate minus 50%. And I'm going to say list style none. List style none to get rid of these bullet points here. Now everything is good. The only thing I need to do, just set the display flex. As we know, it will just put it like this. In the LIs, I can say border radius maybe 50 pixel, adding a little bit of a margin to each of those, so 10 pixel margins. This seems to be a little bit big. I'm just going to say instead of 20, I'm just going to say 40 pixel on width and height. So now everything looks good. It's not completely centered, as you can see. It's because UL by default has padding and margin. So I'm just going to set the padding and margin to 0. Now you can see it's completely centered. I'm going to also set a background to be the same color, which is 333. Now we have our indicators. Going ahead and set the indicator cursor to be pointer. Now you can see that, yeah, shows that they are clickable. Now to the actual style. If you notice in the original that I showed you, you can see that when this one gets selected, it actually changes its style. So I'm going here, copying my LI, and then just say here if LI has a selected class on it, I will set the, let's just say here, and then I would just say background to be transparent, right? I don't want the background of the selected to have 333, but transparent. So if I go ahead and set the class here to be selected, you can see that this will be looking all right. Now we are on first section in our CSS. We have the CSS selected class defined. We added it for the first one. We have the first content, and also in JavaScript, we set the section index to be 0. So we are all good. Now, what I need to do is making sure that when I click on each of these, so basically here I can say document.query selector all. I know that I have my controls, and then these are li within the controls. For each of those, I will pass a function as a parameter, and then just say indicator here, and then I would add event listener. So I would say indicator add event listener, click. The second parameter will be a function, and then within that function, what happens is that I need to basically, based on the index number, translate using the same values here. So here, the cool thing with for each is that I can actually pass a second parameter here, which is the index of each of these, right? So if I click on this, the index will be 0. Click on this, the index will be 1. So what I need to do when I click, I'm just copying this and then paste it here. So now instead of section index, I just replace it with index, this IND here. Now if I start clicking, you can see that it goes to section 2, section 3, and section 4. So everything looks all right here in this sense. But also, one important thing is that if I go to section 2 here, or section 3, when I click on the arrow, left arrow, I want to go to section 2, right? But it will go to section 1 because we also have to update this section index that operates the left arrow and right arrow operations to the value that corresponds to the current value that we select here. So instead of IND, the only thing I can do is set the section index, the global section index, to this IND variable, and then use the section index over here, right? So now if I go to the third one and then click on the left arrow, you'll see that it works properly and correctly. Now if I can go here, it goes to section 4, but now the indicator doesn't get updated with the corresponding section, right? In order to fix that, what we can do, because we have the index over here, I just can say slider. Well, basically we have the indicator here. When we click on it, I can say indicator.classList.add, and selected, right? So now if I click the second one, you can see that it is selected, selected, selected. But what we need to do is that initially we have already a selected one. When I click on this, we have to remove the selected class from this one. So what I can do here, I basically can just say um, just query document query selector for anything that is selected within my controls, and then remove that selected class from it, right? So basically what happens here is that when I click on an indicator, it first sets the global section index to be that index of the item here. It removes the selected class from this one, and then it adds the selected class to this one if I click on this. You can see that now everything works pretty well. So far so good. Now the only thing I need to fix is basically when I use the arrows, I want the corresponding section to be reflected here on the indicator status here, right? Right now, if I click the section 3, this one doesn't get updated. What I can do is that I can basically have a reference to the indicator. So I'm just going to create a variable const indicator parents, which in my HTML will be this UL, right? So in my JavaScript, I say indicator parents is document.query selector, should be like this, query selector controls UL, right? Now here I can simply just say indicator parents dot children. Since I have the index here, I can just use the children array and then just say section index dot uh, class list dot add selected, right? As easy as that. I can use the same code for the right arrow as well. Now also I need to run this one as well, so that it basically when I click on the arrays, it actually deselects the one that is already selected. So now if I click on this, everything is fine. Now if I click on this, you can see that it basically selects the corresponding value. A little bit of a refactoring. If you notice, there are three things that actually are basically used in three different methods right here. So what I can do is I'm going to create a function set index, passing the selected index here, for example. I'm going to copy one of these from here. So I'm just going to cut it and paste it over here, right? And instead of this basically instead of let's say section index, I can just say index here. The other thing that I need to make sure I don't copy actually is because here I need to actually add the indicator. So now I can literally just say set index and then section index, right? As easy as that. The same thing I can do for basically the left arrow and right arrow event listener. So I can just remove this and just say um, set index and then pass the section index, right? Same thing here. I'm going to copy this line over here, and then I'm going to remove these two and say set index and then section index, right? So now we have a little bit of a less code, more readable. We know that each of these functions call the set index, and we don't have a duplicated code. So now if I click on this, you can see that it actually works as expected. The other important thing is that I don't really need to pass this index because section index that I'm using over here is actually a global variable. So I can just go ahead and remove this and just use section index over here, right? So now I can go ahead and remove these arguments from these functions. Now you can see that everything works the same way as I want. Apparently, one thing that doesn't happen is that I don't get this to work, and the reason being that let's see why. The reason being that indicator class list add, so this should potentially work. Well, obviously the reason being that I have to maybe do this. And now, yes, it was the ordering issue because I'm running this, removing the class, so it actually has to be before the indicator add selected. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. It was a bit extensive. Please go ahead and ask me any questions in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You can see that we have a pretty much clean code, not that much of a code. Everything is pretty obvious what we are doing. Left arrow click, right arrow click, and then the set index function that we call on each of these. And also we go over looping over all these elements or items or our indicators, and based on the click we just set the global index to the index of the one that is clicked, and so forth. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'm going to put the link up to this prototype in the description section, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, again, please go ahead and subscribe. And it's because of you guys that I can continue create one tutorial every day, and we're gonna rock together. Have a great day and night. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.